Hi, and welcome to week 4. I hope that everything went well last week. This week is your light reading week because you only have one chapter to read in this book. So hopefully you'll have some time to decompress from the pace of this class and everything else that's going on in the rest of your life. So today we're looking at South Asia, and we'll start with India. About 71 million years ago, the Indian landmass started moving towards the Eurasian plate. And over time, you can see that it eventually collided with it. Now, when you have one continent and another continent that want to come together, these two types of land, neither of them wants to subduct. And so what happens is you just get the Himalaya mountains building up, just stacking up on top of each other. And you can see here where the Indian plate is indeed running into the Eurasian plate. Now, so basically, India divides the Arabian Sea from the Bay of Bengal. Um, this area is active in the north with earthquakes because of the mountain building that's happening. But the rest of the country to the south is not generally affected by it. So there are 3 major rivers in this area. The first one runs down through Pakistan, and it's called the Indus River. And Pakistan is very arid place. So the presence of the Indus River and then where the river outlets into the Arabian Sea and forms a delta is very important because this is one of the only places that is good for agriculture in the country. The second is the Ganges, which begins in the Himalayas also, and it runs down basically parallel to the front of the mountains on what's called the Ganges Plain, and that's where you have a good agricultural area there as well. The third is the Brahmaputra River. It originates in the Himalayas also, but it comes down through Bangladesh, and the delta that goes out into the Bay of Bengal is where the majority of that country's food comes from. Now, you can also, by looking at this map, see the green areas where there's agriculture basically lining along the front of the Himalayas. So this is another area where they're able to have large scale agriculture to be able to feed the population. Now, the main body, the triangle of India, is what is called the Deccan Plateau. And it's comprised of layers of volcanic deposits, lava. And so this soil, because it's lava, can be fertile, but the plateau is relatively arid, and there aren't a lot of rivers coming across it. So that is there's a positive and a negative for living on the Deccan Plateau. You also have 2 other plateaus in the central India plateau and the Chota Nagpur. Now, along the east and west coasts of the bottom of the country are what are called the Ghats. And the Western Ghats on the western side and the Eastern Ghats on the eastern side. And Ghats are simply just when you have a steep drop off from a plateau and you have a thin strip of coast that runs along it. Sorry about that. All right. So now let's look at climate. And as you can see over here in Pakistan, you have that very dry climate, the arid climate. And that's one of the reasons why, excuse me, the river is so important over there. You have humid, temperate, and humid equatorial climates in Bangladesh and in India. And then Nepal and Bhutan, the 2 very small countries at the top, are basically in the mountain zones. So they have very little lowlands. It's mostly ice, not a lot of trees. So what they eke out their living up there is very different from how you would do it down in India or Bangladesh. These are important places because this is where all three of the great rivers are born from the glaciers up there. And as we've talked about every week, that the snow melt in the spring brings flooding in the rivers that is going to help irrigate the crops that you plant. This is, again, particularly important for Pakistan because it's the only place where they can have agriculture. Now, this area is also dependent on the monsoon rains for agriculture. Oops, wrong way. And what you see here is that starting in the west, you have this moist airflow that's moving and hits the Western Ghats. And when it does, it drops its rain there. Because it does that, moisture is gone. When you move to the other side of the Ghats, the main portion of the Deccan Plateau is arid. And that's why there's, even though it's fertile soil, it's difficult to farm there because you have very few rivers and because the moisture doesn't reach there. The rest of the monsoon actually comes up through the Bay of Bengal and basically right up the North Indian Plain, which follows the path of the Ganges river. Now, this portion of the Ganges and then all of Bangladesh, where the Brahmaputra is, those are the main agricultural lands. So they're highly dependent on the monsoons to help grow the monsoons and the snowmelt. One of the problems is that because of climate change, the typhoons in this area are getting a lot stronger. And when they come up the Bay of Bengal and go into Bangladesh, there was one a year ago and it flooded out like 70% of the delta, which killed the crops that were growing there. But people also live there. Like a portion of the delta only rises 10 feet above sea level, a good distance inland. So those storms are extremely devastating to a country that only has that one area to grow food. All right, so let's talk about historical geography. Who lived there before? If we look over along the Indus River, this is called the Indus Valley Civilization, which today is modern day Pakistan. And it started about 2,500 years BC, which is really interesting because it was the same time independently that Egypt and Mesopotamia were beginning their great revolutions as well. They created cities, they created government, they had crops, animals, science, and they were a cultural hearth for many things, which then would be extended out as things spread. Well, in about 1500 BC, the Aryans, who were basically Indo-Persians, Indo-Europeans that were from Persia, they gathered the people in this area into an organized system. They came in and they decided they were going to bring it into one thing. However, what they brought in was their language, and then they brought in their new social order. Well, they practiced social stratification, which is, I'm going to show you, translated into the modern day caste system. They had people from the wealthiest down to the poorest, and you didn't mix within the different orders. But what they did was they took Hinduism, the Aryans did, and they developed a hierarchy ranking people from the powerful to the weakest. And so that's where the social stratification and the caste system evolved from, was what the Aryans were saying and how they combined it with the Hindu religion. And then that's what stuck. And today there are still places where the caste system is operating, but in other places where India has moved into more global capacity, it's losing its value. So Islam was there for 7 centuries. And when it left, when it left, you had Pakistan and then what's currently Bangladesh. This was West Pakistan, and Bangladesh was East Pakistan, and then all the way up through the range above. So West Pakistan, Bangladesh became free of West Pakistan, changed their name to um, Bangladesh, is still 90% Muslim. And Pakistan is still 90% Muslim. But today, even after 7 centuries of rule, only 15% of the population is Muslim. And it's just astounding that for that long of a rule, that something didn't take. Um, so, of course, England took over trade here in the mid 18th century. I think I've said that in every lecture, unfortunately. Um, excuse me. And they created what was called the East India Company. What they wanted was economic control, like they did in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. They made the local people in charge, and they took over all of the trade, all the way to the Chinese. But eventually the British moved in to take over the land as well. And this was at the same time that the Industrial Revolution was happening. So they had been taking raw materials and sending them back to Britain, but now they set up industrial centers there, and they used the sources and created the products locally. They put in huge transport networks like railroads. They made canals, they maximized agriculture, seaports were developed, and major cities were built, and education was encouraged. So when the country finally gained its independence, excuse me, and West Pakistan became Pakistan, East Pakistan became Bangladesh, you have an area in the north called Kashmir. And Kashmir is claimed by both India and Pakistan. And it's a disputed territory. So it would have like the ruler is from India, but the citizens are from Pakistan. It's an area that ever since things ended up becoming free, it has not picked one side or another, although they did a poll and 99% of Kashmir residents voted to become their own country. All right. And we talked about emerging markets and BRICS, the ones who are really working to come out. British, Russia, excuse me, South Africa, India. And the markets had to change in the 20th century because the country was almost bankrupt. And so what they did was they decided that state-run companies could become privatized, so that way you could bring in foreign investment. They lowered trade tariffs, government subsidies that were going into other parts of the country were reduced. There was deregulation and corporate cutting of corporate taxes. So all of these things sharply increased the new economic growth. Now, some of the places that we're seeing the economic growth we're familiar with, the IT sector has exploded. They're manufacturing now, service industries. There's a huge finance section. And with all of the foreign investment that has been brought in and is increasing the economy, what we're seeing now is that there's a growing middle class. And the middle class wants, luxuries or things that it couldn't have before. And it's creating a consumer market. So this growing population of the middle class is wanting more products that are geared toward them. Well, different companies have gone into India to try and, create a product that would be good. It's a market that basically people don't know what they need until you present it to them. And one of the countries that went in was Gillette, and they decided they were going to make a razor for men in India, and it was a total flop because you had to use water to be able to use the razor, and many places don't have running water. So what they developed was a 5 blade razor that you didn't need water for, and it fit a niche in the market, and it absolutely took off. Because most Indians do their shopping daily for food, someone decided that traditional refrigerators weren't necessary for them. So they went and designed one that's powered by solar, and it's smaller and it's just enough to hold a day or two's food. And now it's being bought, a lot. So having a market open like this, to increase their economy, the people are turning around and putting money back into it. Excuse me. All right. So here's the industrialized areas. And what you can see is that you have the major industrial regions in areas that were basically former ports. If you look at the eastern one, that is one where you have the Ganges River emptying. If you look at the southern industrial region, that was the area where you could go between Sri Lanka and India to go along that section of the coast. So it was set up during the time of colonialism. And you can also see the trains that they have and the iron and steel manufacturing that is taking place in the area. So you can see where these nodes are present right now. And India, like other countries, has set up some of these zones to specifically attract foreign companies to come and actually have operations in India so that it will feed the local population. Now, even though this is industrializing, even though this market is emerging, excuse me, agriculture is still responsible for 20% of their GDP. And you can see where they have planted crops that are set to the climate. So you have rice in the area where you have the deltas and where you have these rivers that you can go and you can cultivate the rice and you can flood them because it takes a lot of water, versus millet, which is taking place on the plateau, and it's a drought resistant crop. So the specialized areas in India are actually where the climate and the soil conditions are suitable for those types of crops. Here's a population map of India, and there are people everywhere. If you see along the coasts, you have strips of them. You see along the northern border, you have strips. That's where the Ganges River Delta is. If you look on the Deccan Plateau and you see kind of these linear features, those follow the few rivers that are actually running across it. If you look over into Pakistan, you'll see most of the western portion of the country is not really inhabited, and that's because it's so mountainous and so arid. And then on the eastern side, you see where the Bangladesh has the delta coming out, and that's the highly populated area because that's where most people work and grow their food. Now, this week, one of your assignments is going to be to look at the Malthusian theory of population and the democratic transition model. And Malthus said that eventually population would get to a point where there weren't enough resources to feed everyone, and that there was going to be a natural die-off because of starvation. And then the democratic transition model looks at the stages of maturity of a country to try and see if they think that this massive die-off could happen, or if it's going to take another trend. So this is also your gen ed task, and I put links in there to explain everything to you, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see what you decide, what direction you think that India is moving in right now. So I hope that you find the assignment really interesting. All right. Finally, I'm going to focus a little bit on Bangladesh right here. Most of the countries is on the Ganges Brahmaputra Delta. This is one of the poorest LDCs on Earth. It has 158 million people in that small area, and most of them are subsistence farmers. When the deltas flood, there's fertile soil, and when you have cyclones, it gets washed away. And what if the monsoons? What if the monsoons shift because of climate change? Um, right now, India can control the Ganges because upstream of where it comes out into Bangladesh is India, so they can decide to dam rivers or divert it or whatever they need. But money has come in for a lot of non-governmental organizations and programs to try and improve the quality of life for the people of Bangladesh. One of the best things that has happened, two good things have happened. One of the best is there are many organizations like kiva.org that offer microcredit loans to people who are looking to have a better life. And some of the loans may only be $100 or $200 so that they could rent a piece of land or buy a piece of equipment to be able to start their own business. And what they found is that the repayment rate of these loans is over 98%. Like the people are taking the loans, doing stuff, and then turning around from their house and cottage industry and being able to pay it back. The second big thing that has come into this country is the garment industry. And like Calvin Klein, Hilfiger, Coach, all of these big name places have factories and operations in Bangladesh, so much so that that textile sector accounts for 80% of the country's GDP. Now, one of the things that they now have to deal with is how long will industries remain in this place? If there are these huge changes that come to affect the area from climate change, then Bangladesh could lose one of its only real outside invested industries that it has. So when we talk about the effects of climate change, we think the sea level is going to rise. You're not going to be able to farm the land. Something like this could really affect the economy, people's lives. Can people feed themselves? So all of that's why in this class, I want us to look at all of the factors from climate to economics to culture to political, because things are much more integrated, I think, than most people realize, more than I realize. And so learning about world regional geography not only makes me care about what's happened, but it makes me care about, the people and what could happen in the future. So, all right. Well, thanks for listening to my lecture. And I just hope that you guys have a great week. And again, if you need anything, just let me know. Thanks.